There was a time when Adrian Cole believed that success could heal everything. He grew up in poverty, vowing that one day he would never let hunger visit his doorstep again. From sleepless nights to endless deals, he built his empire from the ground up, a chain of luxury hotels that bore his name in gleaming letters across city skylines. But in chasing that light, he didn't notice the darkness growing behind him. Years passed like waves hitting the shore, one triumph after another. He had money, recognition, and the world's respect. Yet the laughter that once filled his home had faded into silence. His wife Evelyn had grown tired of waiting for a husband who never came home before midnight, and his little daughter Lily had learned to recognize his voice only through phone calls that came fewer each year. Adrian kept telling himself that he was doing it all for them. Every contract signed, every business trip taken, every night spent in hotels rather than home, all for a future they would thank him for. But deep down, he knew he was running from something. The guilt of not being there, the fear of being ordinary, the ache of knowing that love couldn't be earned with wealth. Then one day, everything changed. It began with a call he almost ignored, a sudden trembling voice from his hometown. His former driver told him Evelyn had passed away unexpectedly after a long illness. Adrian's heart froze, and for the first time in years he felt the walls around him crumble. He had been in another country signing $1 million deal when his wife took her last breath, and he hadn't even known she was sick. The guilt swallowed him whole. He returned home, not as a husband or father, but as a stranger walking into a life he no longer recognized. The house felt smaller, colder, untouched since the day Evelyn left. The photos on the wall still showed the three of them smiling, back when love was stronger than ambition. But now those smiles mocked him. He tried to find his daughter, but Lily wasn't there. The neighbors said she hadn't been seen in weeks. A relative had taken her in for a while, but she disappeared after that, perhaps too broken, too lost to stay where love once lived. Adrian felt his chest tighten. He had all the money in the world, yet not a single clue where his child was. For days he searched, city to city, street to street. A man who once commanded boardrooms now wandering alleys and parks, asking strangers about a little girl with soft brown hair and eyes that once looked at him like he was her hero. He'd given her everything, except himself. And as the sun set behind the city skyline one fateful evening, Adrian's search took him to the quieter side of town, a cluster of old houses where time moved slowly. He parked his car near a local bakery and watched as families shared laughter around dinner tables visible through small windows. That's when he saw her, a thin figure near the curb, holding a small paper box. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled, but there was something painfully familiar in her stance, the tilt of her head, the way she held her hands close to her chest. He stepped closer, unsure, afraid to believe his heart. Then she turned. It was Lily. She was older now, fragile, but unmistakably his daughter. And she wasn't eating. She was asking the baker's wife for leftovers. Her voice trembled, not from pride, but from hunger. The woman handed her a half-eaten roll, and Lily whispered something before running off toward the alley, clutching the food as if it were treasure. Adrian froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. The man who once signed deals worth millions couldn't move a single step. His chest felt hollow, his throat dry. He had dreamed of a reunion filled with tears and hugs, but instead, he found his daughter begging for food. Tears welled in his eyes as he stood there, unable to breathe. The life he built, the empire he defended, none of it mattered now. His daughter was starving while he sat in penthouses and boardrooms. And in that moment, Adrian Cole, the millionaire everyone envied, realized he was the poorest man alive. The streetlights flickered on as Lily disappeared into the dim alleyway. He took a hesitant step forward, heart pounding, mind spiraling between shame and disbelief. He wanted to call out to her, to run, to hold her and never let go, but something stopped him. Maybe fear, maybe guilt. As he followed her from a distance, he saw her slip into a small abandoned house at the end of the street, one he hadn't noticed before. Through the cracked window, he watched her share the bread with someone else, a smaller child, a boy no older than 6. Adrian's heart broke even further. His daughter, once surrounded by comfort and warmth, was now caring for another child with the same tenderness her mother once had. Despite her hunger, She gave most of the bread to the boy first. That image burned into his soul. He stood there, hidden in the dark, watching his little girl act out the very love he had long forgotten how to give. The sound of the night surrounded him, distant traffic, the hum of the city, and somewhere deep inside, the crack of his own heart breaking. He turned away slowly, tears streaming silently down his face. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't know what to do next. His money couldn't fix this. His power couldn't reach this place. Only love could. The one thing he had left behind years ago. As the night deepened, he sat in his car, staring at the small house where his daughter slept beside a child who wasn't hers. His reflection in the window looked nothing like the man he once admired. And as the cold air crept through the silence, Adrian whispered to himself, though no one could hear, that tomorrow, everything would change. The night after Adrian saw his daughter for the first time in years felt endless. He sat in his car across the street from the crumbling house, his thoughts tangled between disbelief and guilt. The moonlight draped across the old building, revealing cracks in the walls and holes in the roof. Yet from one broken window, a faint candle flickered, the only sign of life inside. Inside that fragile light was his little girl. His Lily sleep refused to visit him that night. Every image haunted him. The way she had bowed her head while asking for food, the way her thin fingers had clutched that piece of bread like it was a miracle. He had missed years of her growing up, years of her laughter, tears, and birthdays. Now she was just a shadow of that once bright child who used to run into his arms after work. And the boy? Who was he? The small figure beside her, barely 6, sharing her meager meal. There had been no mention of another child. Adrian's mind raced with questions. Was he her brother, her friend, a stranger she had taken under her care? Whoever he was, Lily had chosen to protect him, even when she had nothing left for herself. As dawn crept over the horizon, Adrian made a silent promise. He would not leave again, not until he understood everything. The next day he returned to the area, blending into the crowd in plain clothes. Gone was the suit, the gold watch, the aura of power. He looked like any other man, tired, worn, invisible. From a nearby cafe window he watched the house as the morning unfolded. After some time, the door creaked open. Lily stepped outside holding the boy's hand. She wore the same faded dress as the night before. Her shoes were too small, the soles nearly gone, but her face, pale, fragile, still carried something, powerful, determination. She led the boy carefully, across the street toward the bakery again. Adrian's heart squeezed as he realized she was repeating her daily routine, collecting leftover bread and returning to feed the child. He followed them from a distance, afraid to frighten her. Every step she took felt like a quiet echo of his own failures. At the bakery, the same woman greeted her kindly. Lily waited patiently until the rush of customers passed, then accepted a small bag of bread. Adrian noticed she didn't beg this time. Instead, she helped sweep the shop floor in exchange. The woman patted her shoulder gently, a gesture of affection that nearly broke him. He turned away for a moment, wiping tears that wouldn't stop. The child he had left behind had grown into someone braver than he had ever been. Later that afternoon, he returned to the alley, watching as Lily and the boy shared their small meal inside the shadowed home. From where he stood, he could see her smile faintly as the boy laughed. Despite the broken surroundings, she was trying to create warmth, a family born not from comfort but from compassion. And then, for the first time, he heard a sound that made his breath catch. Her laughter. Faint, cracked but real. It had been years since he heard it last. The sound pulled him backward in time, to a sunny morning long ago when Lily was just 5, sitting on his shoulders while Evelyn watched them from the porch. He could still hear her saying she wanted to grow up and make everyone happy. Now here she was, keeping that promise in the darkest corner of the city. As evening fell, Adrian gathered his courage. He approached the house slowly, his footsteps silent on the dirt road. The smell of damp wood and old dust filled the air. Through the window, he could see them curled up under a torn blanket. The candle had burned out and the room was swallowed by shadow. He wanted to walk in, to hold her, to tell her he was sorry for every day he hadn't been there. But something stopped him. Maybe it was shame. Maybe fear that she wouldn't recognize him, or worse, that she would. He turned away again, his heart a battlefield. That night he couldn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his car watching the house hour after hour. Every sound made him flinch. The distant barking of a dog, the rumble of passing trucks, the faint cough from inside the small house. He thought of Evelyn, of her gentle patience and quiet suffering. He thought of the promises he had broken, all in the name of providing a life that was never lived. When the first light of dawn touched the street, Adrian finally made a decision. He stepped out of his car, crossed the road, and stood before the door of the old house. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle, but before he could knock, a voice broke through the silence. A small, hoarse cough followed by the sound of the boy crying. Adrian froze. Peering through the window, he saw Lily sitting up, holding the boy close. The child was shivering, his face pale. She tried to comfort him, whispering words he couldn't hear. Panic spread through Adrian's chest as he realized the boy was sick, too weak to even sit upright. Lily tore a piece of her blanket, soaked it in a bowl of water, and placed it on the boy's forehead. Her movements were desperate but careful. Adrian's heart pounded. She was doing everything she could, alone. He wanted to burst through the door, take them both somewhere safe, but his feet stayed planted. He was afraid. Afraid of what, she would say. Afraid that his presence might only make things worse. He stood there until the boy's crying softened, until Lily's eyes closed from exhaustion, her hand still on his head. And in that moment, Adrian understood what love truly was. Not the grand gestures he had built his life on, but the quiet sacrifices made when no one was watching. He walked back to his car, his hands shaking, his face wet with tears. For the first time in decades, he prayed, not for wealth or power, but for a chance to make things right. The next morning, he made a call to an old friend, a man who owed him more than one favor. He didn't explain much, only that he needed a small renovation team and supplies delivered to a specific address. He also called the local orphanage, asking if they knew a boy matching the child's description. But what he learned next made his heart stop. The orphanage director told him that a young boy named Thomas had gone missing months ago, a child who had lost both parents in a car accident and had escaped foster care after being mistreated. They had searched for him everywhere, but there had been no trace. Adrian looked toward the small house again, his pulse quickening. The boy sleeping beside Lily was Thomas, and his daughter, the one he had abandoned, had been the only person in this cold world who chose to love and protect him. The morning, light stretched across the city like a quiet promise, washing away the night's sorrow. But inside Adrian Cole's heart, the weight only deepened. He sat in his car once again, parked across from the crumbling house where his daughter and the little boy slept. The street was quiet, the air still cold. The same small window flickered with life as Lily woke, folding the blanket carefully around the child before stepping outside to fetch water from the rusted hand pump nearby. Her movements were steady, purposeful, but her frailty was undeniable. Adrian watched her for a long time, his heart aching with pride and pain all at once. There was strength in her, Evelyn's strength, quiet, selfless, unyielding. And yet seeing her live like this felt like punishment, a wound he had carved into his own soul. He had once believed that money could solve any problem. Now, standing just meters away from the only family he had left, he realized how little power it truly held when love had been abandoned. But this time he wouldn't run. He wouldn't try to buy forgiveness. He would earn it, even if she never knew. That day marked the beginning of Adrian's silent redemption. He started with small things, gestures that carried no name, no recognition. At dawn, he left a basket of food on the old wooden steps outside their door, bread, milk, fruit, and a small blanket. When Lily opened the door later that morning, her surprise was visible even from across the street. She looked around, confused, her eyes scanning the empty road. Then she carried the basket inside, holding it as if it were sacred. From that moment, Adrian made it his mission to protect her from the shadows quietly, invisibly. Every day he left something new, fresh clothes, a candle, medicine. Once he left a small toy car for the boy, remembering how Lily used to love simple surprises when she was younger. She never found out who it came from, and he didn't want her to, not yet. He wanted her to heal first. Weeks passed, and Adrian found himself living a double life. By day, he returned to the business world, board meetings, interviews, the endless pull of responsibility, but his heart no longer belonged there. The suits felt heavier, the voices around him emptier. His mansion, once filled with trophies and art, felt like a museum of regret. By night, he drove back to the small neighborhood, always parking in the same spot, watching from the same distance. He watched Lily and the boy grow stronger. He saw her laugh again, though faintly, as the child played with the toy car on the dusty floor. He noticed her clothes becoming cleaner, her cheeks slightly fuller. She was rebuilding her life, one quiet day at a time. And yet beneath her strength, Adrian could still see the loneliness that lingered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. A loneliness that mirrored his own. One evening, heavy rain fell across the city. The street turned into a river of mud and runoff, the roof of the small house leaking in several places. Adrian watched from his car, restless, his hand gripping the steering wheel. He wanted to help, but fear chained him to his seat. Fear of revealing himself too soon, of being rejected by the very child he longed to hold. But when lightning cracked across the sky and the candlelight inside the house went out, something inside him broke. He stepped out into the storm, the cold rain soaking him instantly. He crossed the street and approached the house, carrying a bundle of supplies, blankets, food, and tools to patch the roof. His shoes splashed through puddles as he reached the door. For a moment he stood there trembling, the rain cascading down his face like tears. Then quietly, he placed everything by the door and stepped back into the shadows before knocking once, just once, before disappearing around the corner. From there, hidden behind a tree, he watched. Lily opened the door seconds later, her small frame silhouetted by candlelight. She hesitated, looking into the storm, and then her gaze dropped to the supplies. Her lips parted in shock. She called out softly into the rain, her voice barely audible, but no one answered. Adrian's heart twisted as he watched her lift the bundle and close the door again. Through the window, he saw her lay new blankets over the sleeping child, then kneel on the floor, her hands folded. She was praying, and though he couldn't hear her words, he knew what they were. She was thanking someone she thought was a stranger. The following morning, the rain had passed, leaving the streets glistening under the sunlight. Adrian returned with a small construction team, men he trusted, who knew better than to ask questions. He told them the repairs were a charity job and made them promise discretion. Within hours, they had fixed the roof, replaced the door, and cleaned the small yard. By the time Lily returned from her errands, the workers were gone, and the house stood stronger than it had in years. She froze at the sight, disbelief washing over her face. Her hands covered her mouth as tears began to fall. Adrian, watching from a distance, felt his own tears mirror hers. She walked inside, slowly, as though stepping into a dream. The candlelight flickered across fresh wood and a dry floor. The boy clapped his hands with joy, running around the small space. Lily laughed, a sound brighter than the sun, and for the first time in a very long while, Adrian smiled. In the days that followed, he continued his quiet mission. He paid the baker to employ Lily part-time, leaving the money anonymously. He arranged for a local doctor to visit under the guise of community aid. Each time she received help, she grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Still, he never revealed himself, because in his heart, Adrian believed he didn't deserve to be her father. Not yet. He was just a man trying to right the wrongs of his past. A silent guardian standing in the shadows of his own mistakes. But life, as always, had its own plans. One afternoon, as Adrian was about to drive away, a familiar sound pierced the quiet air. A cough, deep and weak. He looked toward the house and saw Lily outside, sitting against the wall, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, her body trembling. The boy stood beside her, frightened, calling for help. Adrian's world spun. He ran toward her without thinking, the pretense of secrecy collapsing like paper in the rain. As he knelt beside her, his trembling hands reaching to steady her shoulders, Lily looked up, her eyes hazy, confused. And for the first time in years, their gazes met. And in that fragile instant, she saw him. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Her lips parted in shock. "Dad," she whispered. Not as a question, but as a memory finding its way home. The moment their eyes met, the world around them seemed to dissolve. The noise of the street, the warmth of the sun, even the frightened cry of the boy standing nearby, everything fell into silence. Adrian froze, his breath caught halfway in his chest. The name she had just spoken, Dad, hit him like a wave crashing through years of guilt and distance. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. It was as though time had folded in on itself, returning them both to a moment they'd lost long ago. Lily's eyes, once bright with childhood wonder, now reflected confusion, disbelief, and the faint, fragile hope of a memory she had buried deep. She looked older than her years, not in body, but in the way pain had shaped her soul. Adrian's hands trembled as he helped her to sit upright. He could feel the fever on her skin, the weakness in her body. But what hurt him more was the look in her eyes, the storm of emotion that flickered there, half recognition, half disbelief. He whispered her name softly under his breath, not daring to speak louder, afraid the sound might shatter what fragile thread held them together in that instant. The boy, Thomas, clung to Lily's arm, his small face tight with worry. Adrian looked at him, then back at her, and in that brief exchange of glances, Lily seemed to understand something. The man standing before her wasn't a stranger. He was the shadow she had seen in her dreams, the one who had always been missing at dinner tables, who had once lifted her into the air as she laughed, who had promised to always be there. But never was. Now here he was, kneeling before her on a cracked sidewalk, his suit drenched in dust, his eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. It was a reunion not of celebration, but of reckoning. Adrian lifted her gently, helping her inside the house. The walls that once felt like silent witnesses now echoed with the sound of shallow breaths and heartbeats. He laid her on the small bed, brushing the hair from her forehead, his hand trembling as though afraid she might disappear if he touched her too roughly. She was burning with fever. He called for a doctor immediately, the same one he had been sending anonymously all these weeks. When the doctor arrived, Lily barely had the strength to stay conscious. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering her name over and over. Adrian stood in the corner, silent, helpless, watching, waiting. As the doctor worked, his thoughts swirled into a storm. Every regret he had ever buried rose to the surface. Every missed birthday, every unanswered letter, every night Evelyn had sat alone by the window waiting for him. And now this, his child lying weak because he had chosen ambition over love. Hours passed before the doctor finally turned to him, his expression somber but calm. Lily would recover, but only with care, food, and rest. Years of struggle had worn her body down. It wasn't just the fever. It was exhaustion, malnutrition, and the heavy toll of surviving without hope. When the doctor left, Adrian sat beside her, the silence between them thick with years of unspoken words. Lily stirred faintly, her hand twitching as if searching for something in the dark. He reached out and held it, his thumb brushing the back of her palm. And though she didn't speak, a single tear slid down her cheek. That tear broke him. In the following days, Adrian didn't leave her side. He brought food, medicine, clean clothes, everything she could need. He slept in his car at night, afraid to be too close, afraid she might wake and send him away. Thomas, too, began to trust him. The little boy followed him around quietly, curious but cautious. Sometimes Adrian would find him sitting by the door, playing with the small toy car he had once left for him. It was in those moments that Adrian saw the faint reflection of the father he used to want to be. Patient, gentle, someone who made others feel safe, and slowly, bit by bit, the walls between them began to crumble. A week later, Lily was strong enough to sit outside again. The morning sun fell softly on her face as she watched Thomas chase a paper plane down the street. Her hands rested on her lap, her body still weak but her eyes alive again. Adrian sat beside her, unsure what to say. The silence between them felt heavy but not empty, more like a bridge being rebuilt plank by plank. He watched her quietly, studying the face that mirrored Evelyn's so perfectly. The curve of her jaw, the quiet sadness in her smile. It all reminded him of the woman he had lost and the daughter he was only now beginning to find again. Lily turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. For a long moment she said nothing. But then softly her eyes filled with tears and her lips parted, not in accusation but in fragile honesty. The look said everything. "Where were you?" And his silence answered for him. Too far away. That night after Thomas had fallen asleep, Adrian walked outside and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years he didn't feel proud of what he had built. He felt grateful for what he still had. The chance to start over, to love quietly, to give without needing to be seen. But as he turned back toward the small house, he noticed Lily standing in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. She looked at him for a long time, and though her face carried sadness, her eyes held something else too. Forgiveness. It wasn't spoken, not yet. But it was there, faint, trembling, like the first dawn after a long night. Over the next few weeks, they began to rebuild something fragile yet real. Adrian helped fix the broken furniture, cooked meals with her, and even read to Thomas in the evenings. Slowly, laughter returned to the little house, but the world outside didn't stop moving. News had begun to spread. Whispers of the mysterious millionaire helping poor families in the neighborhood. Reporters began asking questions. Business partners wondered why Adrian Cole had suddenly disappeared from meetings and turned down new projects. He didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt alive. Yet deep inside, a quiet dread lingered, the fear that this peace wouldn't last, that the world he had built might one day intrude again. One afternoon, as they sat together sharing lunch, Thomas asked a question that made both of them freeze. He looked at Adrian innocently and asked, "Are you my dad too?" Lily's eyes widened. The air turned still. Adrian smiled softly but didn't answer right away. He reached out, ruffling the boy's hair, and said only what his heart knew to be true. That family wasn't always about blood, but about love. Lily's gaze softened. Her hand found his under the table, and for a brief, perfect moment, the world outside didn't matter. But as the sun began to set that evening, a car stopped at the end of the street, sleek, black, unfamiliar. A man stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit, holding a folder in his hand. He looked around before his eyes landed on the small house. Adrian's heart sank. He recognized him immediately. It was one of his company's executives, and in that instant, Adrian knew the quiet life he was rebuilding was about to collide with the one he had tried to leave behind. The sound of the car door closing shattered the fragile peace that had wrapped itself around that quiet little street. Adrian's heart thudded in his chest as he watched the suited man approach. The world he had tried to escape now walking straight toward the home he had begun to love. The man was one of his top executives. Daniel Ross, sharp, loyal, and unrelenting. Adrian knew that look on his face. It was the same expression he himself had once worn when business came before all else. Lily, unaware of the man's identity, stepped back inside with Thomas, sensing something in her father's silence. Adrian stayed where he was, meeting Daniel halfway down the path, the air thick with tension. Daniel spoke briskly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Sir, the board's been searching for you. The press is asking questions. Investors are nervous. Everyone's wondering why Adrian Cole vanished from the world overnight." Adrian didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the small house behind him, the flicker of the candlelight inside, the faint laughter of the boy, the quiet hum of life that had given meaning back to his heart. For a long moment he simply breathed. Then softly he said the words that had been waiting inside him for years. "I haven't vanished, Daniel. I just finally found where I belong." Daniel blinked, uncertain. "You mean here? In this place? With them?" His voice trembled between confusion and disbelief. "Sir, you can't just walk away. You've built an empire. People depend on you." Adrian smiled sadly. And for years I thought that was enough. That power, success, and money were the same as love. But they're not. I spent my whole life building something grand enough to fill the emptiness I created. It never worked. Daniel looked at him speechless. The man who had once been a symbol of ambition now looked like something far rarer. Peaceful. Adrian placed a hand on his shoulder. Handle the company, Daniel. You don't need me to keep it alive. But my daughter, she does. When the car finally left, the street fell silent again. Adrian turned back toward the small house, his clothes still damp from the evening air. Through the cracked window, he could see Lily setting the table, 3 plates, 3 cups, and a small candle flickering in the center. He hesitated at the door for a moment, letting the stillness of the scene sink into his heart. Then he stepped inside. Lily looked up at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with the quiet recognition of a truth that had already settled between them. He didn't need to explain. She already knew. As they sat together at the small table, the light from the candle danced across their faces. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel like a visitor in his own family's story. He felt home. They ate in silence, the simple meal tasting richer than any banquet he had ever attended. Thomas laughed between bites, his joy filling the space like sunlight breaking through clouds. And in that laughter, Adrian felt something inside him heal. Days passed and the rhythm of life returned. Adrian began working quietly for the community, repairing roofs, funding schools, arranging meals for those who needed them most. He didn't announce his donations or sign his name anywhere. The people in that small town didn't know who he truly was, and that anonymity was his peace. Lily recovered fully, her strength returning. She took up work at the bakery, smiling more freely each day. Thomas, full of boundless energy, often ran through the streets carrying his toy car, telling anyone who would listen that he had a real family now. Adrian spent his mornings walking him to school, and his evenings sitting with Lily on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they just sat in silence, the kind that didn't need words because love had already filled it. But the past doesn't simply disappear. One afternoon, as they sat together, Lily asked the question he had feared since the day they reunited. Her voice was calm, steady, but her eyes carried the weight of a lifetime. Why didn't you come back sooner? Adrian didn't answer right away. The words formed slowly, carefully, as though they'd been buried deep within him for too long. Because I thought success would make everything right. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I earned enough, it would prove my love. But all it did was build a wall between me and the people I loved most. He turned to look at her, his voice breaking. By the time I realized that, it was already too late. Your mother was gone, and I thought I'd lost you too. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his. You didn't lose me, she whispered. You just forgot where to find me. Adrian closed his eyes. Those words, soft, forgiving, were the very grace he had prayed for. As the months passed, the small town began to change. The once broken houses were repaired, children attended school with new books, and the bakery where Lily worked became the heart of the community. People whispered about a mysterious benefactor, a man who never asked for thanks. They didn't know that the man they spoke of once lived in penthouses, flew across continents, and signed deals worth millions, only to discover that the greatest fortune was the smile of his daughter and the laughter of a child he now loved like his own. Years later, as the seasons turned, Adrian found himself sitting on the same porch, his hair now streaked with gray. Lily was beside him, her arm resting lightly on his shoulder, and Thomas played in the yard, building small castles in the dirt. The sun dipped low, painting the world in gold. Adrian smiled faintly. He had spent a lifetime chasing light, only to discover that it had been waiting for him here all along, in the quiet corners of love, forgiveness, and simple kindness. He looked at his daughter and spoke softly, his voice carrying both sorrow and peace. I used to think the greatest tragedy was losing everything I built, but now I see it was never about what I built. It was about what I forgot to love. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice tender and sure. You found it again, Dad, and that's what matters. And as the final light of day faded, the man who once owned everything realized he had never truly owned anything until that moment. True wealth is not found in what we own, but in who we love. Success means nothing when it costs us the people who make life worth living. Redemption doesn't come from fortune. It comes from humility, forgiveness, and the courage to love again. A touching finale to a story of loss, forgiveness, and rediscovered love. A reminder that the richest hearts are often found in the humblest places.